The new release, Waterlog, that comes
Yes,
out at the beginning of February. Tell us about it.
this is an improvised album, so I didn't have any particular idea of what it was going to be about, just the intention of sitting down and just letting whatever comes through come through. Um, the label has just started, so it's a strong emphasis on following your instincts with improvisation, experimental music, and so yeah, I just left it fairly open. I did have a few themes I was thinking about, um, but I sat down with I think 4 pedals, my microphone, guitar, and basically just played. And I did it in about 3 or 4 sessions, and from the very first session, it was immediate of what I was feeling, which was a massive wave of grief over my cat who'd passed away a few months earlier, which I think I'd been aware of, but it hadn't come through creatively. So it felt like this big grey cloud just kind of waiting for me. And as soon as I sat down, it's like, oh, okay, great. Let's go get her. And yeah, so I went with that. I felt a little bit of resistance at first, but I just let it come through because the whole idea was to do that, just to feel whatever is there and let it come out. So
I saw that in the notes as I was preparing for our chat today. I'm so sorry to hear about that. Losing a pet's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because those of us, and I know you're one of them, who have lost a family member, it's such a profound experience, and yet a pet can be sometimes just as difficult.
yes, I mean, I think grief in general can tend to be cumulative. So when you lose a family member, a loved one, a pet, there is that tendency to go into that headspace or heart space where you think of, others you've lost along the way, and you contemplate meaning of life, all this kind of stuff. But yeah, when someone who is always there in your daily life leaves, it leaves, yeah, a really big gap. And I think just processing that, takes as long as it takes, but yeah, it affects different areas of your life. And for me, music is very much about emotions and about feelings and processing them. Like, I don't know what I'm feeling often until I've gone deeply into it to kind of figure it out and can put words or sounds to it. Um, so it was very cathartic, but also just being aware of how much grief is a part of all of our lives and does affect us. So, yeah.
I think you make a really interesting point about the idea of the cumulative nature of that experience. I can relate to that directly. I've always found it to be very grounding. It's a maturing experience, and it gives you, I think, a more balanced, fulsome view of the world. Have you found that?
Yeah, I mean, there's different stages of grief, and there's that angry feeling where it's like, why? Like, you're just pissed off and really trying to understand what the reason is, or things you could have done differently, more time you could have spent, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, there's this softening that kind of comes, and the more time you spend in that place and let yourself grieve, let yourself feel, and just behave differently. Like, if you don't feel like talking to people, one day you might be fine and the next day you're a mess, and just being okay with that instead of healing or becoming whole. I don't really believe in that kind of approach. We're constantly changing and shifting, And I think, yeah, grief has a big impact on how we see the world, and definitely changes as we get older. You get you get used to it, right? Because it happens more and more. So like anything, it's like, oh, okay, I'm here, it comes again, and you get to know it more and more, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's tough.
Mm.
Yeah.
How does it come across in your music, and specifically this particular release, Waterlogged? How do you hear the grief?
Um, Wailing, deep sobbing, like all these sounds. When you think of someone crying and all the different ways of crying and expressing feelings, like it's like from the heart to the throat. Like there's this space there where there's so much emotion, and at times it's pouring out, you know. So there's a couple of tracks on there where because I was crying throughout this. I'm laughing because I feel a little bit embarrassed, but that's part of the process, right? So there's this kind of yeah, a couple of songs with this, I would say, operatic. I don't know anything about opera singing, but it felt to me like that kind of projection of the voice out into the universe, like this kind of emotional kind of crying, but yeah, it was just kind of catapulted out. So there's a few songs in that style. There's some soft kind of whispering tones, but it's just exploring how the grief comes through the voice. And I didn't sit down with that intention, but that's how it came out, and that's what I see in retrospect, because at the time you don't know what's going on. It's just, this is coming through. But after, when I was going through and editing a whole lot of the material, I could see, or I could hear what was going on in my voice emotionally. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, this is starting to make sense. So yeah.
We talk a lot about the voice as an instrument.
Yes.
I think uh, it relates to your work very directly for me. Yours is, I could compare it to an electronic instrument. I could compare it to even, instruments that go into the development of sound sculpture. There's a kind of
Yeah.
expressiveness in your work, in particularly your vocal work, that comes across. What's your sense of the role your voice plays in the music?
It's texture, it's tone, it's totally an instrument. I started, or my first and only band, Heligoland, the voice, like I started very much in the background, but I kind of learnt to sing in response to the instrument. So I felt very much like I was an instrument, and kind of approaching it in that way, like wanting to, when you're all jamming in a room together, like wanting to just kind of move between everything and bounce around and play with all the sounds, instead of being right on top, like most singers would be, right? Like you're sitting on top and the music's underneath. Like I wanted to dive in there, which again, I just was not aware of what I was doing at the time. It's only later on reflection you can kind of see these patterns emerging, but it's just this genuine curiosity, because everyone has a different voice, like a different tone, a different texture. Like there's so many little details, and it's just fun to explore your voice and your uniqueness and all the weird little things, of the flaws, the imperfections, the things that make us human. And I also find really fascinating when you start layering your voice. So you think of a synthesizer and all the tones and the sounds that go into that, all the voices that go into that. And you can do lots of fun things with just a loop pedal alone. Just, yeah. So I find it very much to be an instrument, and I love treating it like that as well, because it's just fun. It's just fun to do that, and fascinating, endlessly fascinating. I think when you start playing around with your own voice, even if you can't sing, it doesn't matter. It's another instrument that a lot of musicians don't even realize they have. And I've had a few people who've asked me, male ambient musicians who've asked me to sing on their track or whatever because they need a female voice. And I'm like, well, you can just pitch shift it. Like, just if it's just sounds, you can do it, you know. There's, yeah. So, but that's another topic. But it's just fascinating to.
Yeah, it really is. There's a clarity, a kind of cleanliness to your solo work that I'm struck by. And I was reading a little bit about how complicated your process can be sometimes. A lot of layering, a lot of use of pedals and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how a typical piece comes together for you.
There's always like a source sound or like a source idea. If it's a raw material, so for Le Mans, that was the sound of the recorded sound on my phone of cars going around the race track. Sometimes it's just a chord on the guitar. It might be a vocal that I've had in my head, but very rarely it starts with a vocal. It's usually something outside of me. But it's just noticing what you're curious about, because that's going to give you a whole bunch of energy to then go and explore it, right? And that's what you need. Like, you want to be passionate about what you're doing. You want to get really excited about it. So I just try to notice how I'm responding to things. But yeah, there's often, like, I can go back to the original moment of when things first started. So I mean, for Waterlog, it was literally just sitting down with those pedals and just pressing record, and then it just came through. But yeah, I think you're chasing something, right? You're looking for something, you're searching for something. And if you let yourself do that instead of feeling boxed in or like you should fit in any one particular genre, you're going to come up with more interesting stuff and you're going to grow more. So,
is there any connection between waterlogged and losing the sea, just in terms of the liquid
grief.
references? Yeah.
Grief. Missing things, and definitely, that's a sense of loss is something that comes up a lot in my, like, if there's one theme that is searching for things, I think also, but yeah, just a sense of loss is coming up a lot. So there is a definite connection between those two. Yes.
But why water? What's water got to do with all of that for you?
Emotion. It's emotion, and it's also where I grew up in Australia. It's on the Mornington Peninsula, and it's a peninsula, so it's surrounded by water. So there's a front beach, there's back beaches, and I've always lived around water. So living here in Paris, it's very much inland, and when I do go to the seaside, once a year, not so much during COVID though, I'm just so happy. I just feel this immediate, like, my endorphins are up here somewhere, and I'm just feeling so calm and like, I can be myself, kind of thing. So yeah, losing the sea was very much realizing, because I'd just come back from a trip to the west coast of Brittany, which is just gorgeous and lost and isolated. And I just realized I just felt really, really sad because I miss it so much. Like I was just literally staring at photos of it and just feeling that longing. So yeah, so there's definitely a connection between those two albums, and grief. It's I know it's just going to keep coming through as a thread. So
I understand that you moved to Paris for very practical reasons. Heligoland was touring in Europe at the time, and so a home base closer to or on that continent made a lot of difference. What's that transition been like for you, and how's it fed your work?
um it feels like a second life, to be honest. It feels like my life in Australia, it was just so completely different. And choosing to live here because it wasn't planned. It was just, okay, 6 months touring, writing, and then, go back to Australia. But it lasted for another 3 months and another six. Like it kept kind of adding on until you realize, oh, actually, I want to stay here because it was just so different to Australia culturally. And also, yeah, I just felt this big life change where I finally realized how important music was to me, because in Australia I was working a full-time job. So it was crazy hours, and music was like a weekend, a couple of nights a week rehearsing type situation. So to devote time, like so much time and energy into it, it was just like, oh, I want more of this. You don't necessarily have a plan for things, but you just know, oh, I want to do more. I need to do more. And yeah, so it very much feels like a second life, like just a different way, like stage two. I think of it's like the next, yeah. So
Hmm.
that's the only way I can describe it.
I've often thought that there's a similarity between Canada and Australia. I'm in Toronto,
Yes.
in that sense of just physical distance from so many of the artists that we love.
Yeah.
And they take on a kind of mythical quality when you're this far away. Um, Particularly those who don't tour, who don't,
Yeah.
get a chance to see. They kind of live in your imagination for years and decades sometimes.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm sure you must have experienced that. And then to all of a sudden be in the middle of it all.
Yeah. That I've yeah, some Canadian friends who visited Melbourne in particular have commented on the similarities, culturally and geographically, to an extent as well, but also in the personality and sense of humor too. But interestingly, like I remember quite a few artists who were big in, or Canada, or Canadian artists were also big in Australia too. There's like these weird patterns with music too. Um, but in Australia, you're so isolated from the rest of the world, and obviously isolated from Europe. So it was so easy to just drive from, Paris to Berlin or Paris to Barcelona, because it was similar to driving from Melbourne to Sydney to play a show. So it felt like, oh my God, everything is so close, and you've got, high-speed trains, and it's just felt very connected, and so rich culturally, with countries being so close to each other. So yeah, it just felt like this big light being turned on. But it's interesting because to French people, the Australia is very exotic, and to Australian people, like France was, very, I don't know, I think a lot of people just thought of the art and culture like that was something that was one of the first, and the food, of course. So both countries kind of thought highly of each other. But yeah, it's interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Tell me about artists that you've admired growing up. I'm interested in particular about vocalists that you've enjoyed, but that more specifically, sparked your interest and led you to a career as a vocalist.
Well, I wasn't doing music until I was 19. So up until that point, I had no idea and no interest at all in making music. And when I did start playing music, it was very much a casual thing. Like I still, I don't consider myself to have a music career. I'm just, I'm making music, but I don't see it in that way. I'm very much in this creative headspace. So I wasn't aware of like I wouldn't say any artist had an impression on me for when it came to for me to make my music, because I just wanted to be myself. Like that's I don't want to sound like anyone else. And I just want to sound like me. But growing up, I can say that there's vocalists I was drawn to that I really loved, and Katie Lang is one of them. Another one that was huge in Australia. I remember when I saw her play in Melbourne and was just blown away by the sheer power of her voice. She did, I think it was I can't remember which tour it was, but I remember Ingenue. I loved, absolutely loved that album. But it was a bit later after that, and she did a version of Roy Orbison's "Crying," which was just gorgeous. But I just remember like how emotional it was and how powerful it was, and just being struck by that. I've always loved Natalie Merchant. I loved PJ Harvey too, but that was, I remember discovering her music was an interesting moment, because I'd listened to just mainstream music up to that point, like just whatever's on the radio. And then some radio stations started playing alternative music. And I remember when she came on the radio with the Dry EP, and just thinking, oh my God, that's so different, and just refreshingly different, because it was raw, and she didn't have a perfect voice. There was many flaws in it, but she was just being herself. So I think a lot of these experiences are somewhere in the back of my mind. Not necessarily to inspire me, but just as a reminder that just do your thing, just do whatever you want to do, because everyone has their own voice, like their own style or whatever. So yeah, just I'm sure there's a whole bunch in there that I'm missing. But, yeah.
Tell us about your radio show.
I'm having a break from it at the moment, because I've done 40 shows, one every fortnight, and I didn't realize how much time and energy was it would take up. So it's good to have a little break. But I just play music that I like. I dig around, people send me stuff, and I just come at it from the perspective of let's just escape, let's just go somewhere else for a bit, because that's what I love about music. It can transport you somewhere else. You can go somewhere else, and also just it's fun to just get on Bandcamp and find a whole lot of new and interesting artists, or there's artists that you talk to as well, and you kind of find out, oh, we've got a new release coming up, and you kind of dig around to find some really interesting stuff. But yeah, it's been a really nice moment for me to just step outside my music, and I don't play any of my music because I want to be, I want to be objective. And I find that I feel weird playing my music. Like, I've done some guest mixes and put some tracks in there, but I tried to make sure they were unreleased or there was something special about them. But I just find it clearer when I don't put my music in there, and I wanted to keep it very much that way for the radio show. So it was very clear that I'm doing this for the love of it, not as like a self-promotion of my music kind of thing.
Very wise. Lost, Found, and
Yeah.
Lost Again is its
Yes.
title. Do you have plans to return to it?
Well, there's replays going on at the moment, and what I said to myself is, I'm going to have a break and just see how I feel. I don't want to set a date to say, oh, I'll come back at this time, at this moment. I just wanted to take winter off and then see how I feel. But they're just running replays, and they've got like 40 shows to get through anyway, so I can take a big break. That's okay. But we'll see. I just want to be open, and I want to do what feels right for me. And I'm just aware that it does take a lot of time and energy. So I have to be in a place where I'm ready. So maybe around the end of spring, we'll see.
What's next for you?
I'm actually working on some remixes at the moment, which I've never done before. So that's pretty exciting. And a few artists asked me to do them, so I didn't reach out or invite them. And I find it interesting what comes to you without asking, right? Things just kind of land on your doorstep, and there was one, and then a few months another one, and I'm like, oh, this is really weird. So I'm just going with it and just enjoying mixing other people's music. It's fun. It's really fun. And yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. And there's a whole bunch of stuff. I've got lots of pans. What's the expression? Not pans in the fire. Oh, there's an expression about things in the fire. I've got lots of them at the moment. But I love working that way, because I will just work intensely on something for a bit and then let it rest. And the rest time is equally as important as the productive time, and then go to something else. And then when I come back to it, I would have thought about the next step that I want to do. So, and also the Heligoland album, we're working on that at the moment. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. So
Canadians like to say balls in the air.
yes.
We have lots of balls in the air. We're a nation of jugglers, Karen.
Yep.
Thank you for this.
No problem. Thanks so much.